Do you have that anterior pelvic tilt on you? If so, you've come to the right place, because I'm going to show you 3 great movements to help you correct this position. Now first, what is anterior pelvic tilt? Well, in the business, we like to call it an extension compression stabilizing strategy, where you start to extend that low back to hang out on your spine for support, instead of trying to use a good stacked position where we can get more core engagement. So to fix this, we want good awareness of our pelvic positioning, but also some really good control with our core muscles. So these 3 movements need to go in order. So the first one is going to be to reduce tension, especially on the backside here. Number 2 is going to be to restore motion or movement, especially in the pelvic area. And then the third is going to be to reinforce, to really get that core to hold that position in place. Also, just a heads up, you don't need any equipment for any of these 3 movements. The first move we're going to do is some child's pose breathing. So if I'm in this tabletop or quadruped position, I'm going to sit back on my heels and then bring my head down to my hands. And remember, number 1 is to reduce tension. So we want to open up this backside. So from here, I'm just going to do 10 to 15 breaths, breathing in through my nose first. And with each breath, I'm trying to force that air into my backside, or I like to think of breathing into my waistband. And with each breath, I'm trying to see if I can expand more and more so I can reduce that muscle tension. I just did a solid 10 breaths there, but if you're super tight, you can go 15 or even 20. Number 2 is we want to restore motion, specifically lumbopelvic motion. So on our hands and knees here, we're going to perform some cat-cows, but we're going to try to isolate them in the low back. So a traditional cat-cow, you're going into that extension and then that flexion. But we're going to challenge ourselves a little bit more by just trying to do that motion from our pelvis. So I like to think of my pelvis as a bowl of water. And to go into that extension, I want to slowly dump that bowl towards the ground as far as I can. And then I want to slowly dump that water out the back, or I like to think of tucking my tail between my legs. We're going to perform a good 10 to 15 reps here. If you struggle with this awareness, don't worry. If this is the only movement you have, that's a good start, but as you continue to do this routine, you want to see if you can go further and further into those flexion and extension ranges. After a good 10 reps here, I feel like I have better awareness of my pelvic positioning. So now we want to do number 3, which is to reinforce that specifically with our core stability. So from this tabletop position, I'm actually going to bring my knees a little bit more backward. And then when we were doing those cat-cows, I'm going to think of holding that tucked pelvis position, or I like to think of tucking that tail between the legs. We're going to slowly rock forward into almost like a tall plank from the knees position, while trying to fight that anterior pelvic tilt or that extension range. If you need to reset, again, think of tucking that tail between the legs, and then you're simply going to rock back and forth for a good 10 to 15 reps. If you start to dump as you try to straighten out here, that's okay. If this is new to you, just go within the range that you can control, and then as you rep this out, you should be able to go further and further while controlling those ranges with your core muscles. I know this looks simple, but after a good 10 reps right here, I'm shaking a little bit. So if you struggle with this anterior pelvic tilt, to fix it, we need to train both the awareness in that area, specifically pelvic motion awareness, and then number 2, we want to be able to control that. So once we find that good stacked position, we want to use our core muscles to solidify it. So to recap, the first movement, the child's pose breathing, was to reduce some of that muscle tension, especially in the low back. Number 2 was to restore pelvic motion, to build that awareness. And number 3 was to reinforce that pelvic positioning while using our core muscles. If this 3-prong approach to fixing your anterior pelvic tilt makes sense to you, then this is a routine you want to build in daily. Or if you really want to fix your anterior pelvic tilt for good, check out my 21-day anterior pelvic tilt program. I'll link that in the description below, where I give you a good 15 unique routines similar to this one that progressively get more challenging over the 3-week period. So by the end of it, you have really good pelvic awareness and you can control that position. Also, I'll leave a promo code for a discount.